In the grim darkness of the far future, there are fates worse than death, much worse. And for the crew of an Imperial Guard tank, trapped within meters of ceramite and plasteel, as corruption seeps through the very air they breathe, death would be a mercy that will never come. Picture this. You are Gunner First Class Marek Vossen of the Cadian 217th Armored Regiment. For 3 years, you've served as the primary gunner aboard the Lehman Russ battle tank Emperor's Wrath. The commander's cupola sits directly above your station. To your left, through the cramped interior that reeks of promethium fumes and recycled air, sits Loader Kane Thruss. Below you, isolated in his own compartment and visible only through the narrow access hatch, driver Yannick Holm guides your 30-ton steel steed across battlefields that would make a lesser man weep. And up top, exposed to the elements but commanding your every move through the crackling Vox system, sits Tank Commander Sebastian Rourke, a man you would follow into the warp itself. That loyalty, as it turns out, might be tested sooner than you think. The interior of a Lehman Russ battle tank is not designed for comfort. It was never meant to be. The Departamento Munitorum and the tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, who sanctified its ancient standard template construct, had one purpose in mind when they blessed these machines into existence: to deliver the Emperor's wrath upon his enemies with maximum efficiency and minimal concern for the mortal servants operating its systems. The crew compartment is cramped to the point of claustrophobia, a fact that becomes grimly relevant when considering what happens when things go wrong. Terribly, horrifically wrong. You cannot simply stand up and walk away. You cannot flee. The hatches are sealed during combat operations, and even if they weren't, abandoning your post in the face of the enemy is an executable offense. Your commissar has made this abundantly clear on multiple occasions. So you remain, strapped into your gunner's seat, your face pressed against the targeting optics, your hands on the firing controls, as the walls of your metal tomb begin to whisper secrets that were never meant for mortal ears. The bond between tank crew members is unlike anything else in the Imperial Guard. Infantry soldiers can scatter, can seek cover, can fight and die as individuals if circumstances demand it. But you and your crew are different. You are extensions of each other, components of a larger organism that happens to weigh 30 tons and mount a battle cannon capable of reducing enemy fortifications to rubble. When Commander Rourke barks an order through the Vox, your hands move to comply before your conscious mind even registers his words. When Thruss loads a shell into the breach, you can feel it in your bones, the satisfying clunk of metal on metal that says your weapon is ready to speak. When Holm shifts gears and the deck tilts beneath your feet, you adjust your stance automatically, your body having learned through countless hours of drill and battle to predict every movement of your iron steed. This synchronization, this unity of purpose, makes you deadly. A well-trained tank crew can destroy an entire enemy position in minutes. You've done it. You've watched through your targeting optics as your shells reduced orc vehicles to scrap metal, as your sponson weapons cut down waves of cultists, as your machine spirit sang its song of destruction across battlefields from here to the eastern fringe. The Emperor's wrath has become your home, your weapon, your church, and your coffin all at once. But unity cuts both ways. What affects one crew member affects all of them. Trapped in this steel box, breathing the same recycled air, touching the same blessed controls, you share everything. The fear, the fury, the faith. And when the warp reaches out with its tendrils of madness and corruption, when demonic entities claw at the barriers between reality and unreality, seeking mortal flesh to inhabit and mortal souls to devour, that same closeness becomes your greatest vulnerability. The Imperium of man is built on faith. Faith in the God Emperor of mankind. Faith in the righteousness of humanity's cause. Faith that the defenders of terror will stand against the darkness no matter the cost. This faith is not merely spiritual comfort. It is armor. It is a weapon. It is the only thing standing between the average human and the predators that lurk in the warp, waiting for any moment of weakness, any crack in the soul through which they might slither into real space and feast upon mortal terror. For a tank crew, faith is tested in ways that infantry could never understand. You cannot see the sky. You cannot feel the wind. You cannot kneel in prayer before a shrine to the Emperor when doubt creeps into your thoughts. Your entire world is reduced to the crew compartment, the targeting systems, the endless rumble of the engine, and the voices of your fellow crew members crackling through the Vox. When those voices begin to change, when they start saying things that make your skin crawl, when you look through the crew access hatch and see Holmes' eyes reflecting a light that has no source in this reality, you have nowhere to run. You have no one to turn to. You are sealed inside with whatever is happening, and the only question that matters is whether your faith is strong enough to resist what comes next. It never is. The Emperor protects, the preachers say, and perhaps he does for a time. But there are billions upon billions of human souls scattered across 1,000,000 worlds, and even the master of mankind in his golden throne cannot shield every single one of them from the malevolent attention of the chaos gods and their demonic servants. Sometimes, despite faith, despite prayer, despite every precaution and every ritual blessing, the warp breaks through. And when it does, when it finds a tank crew sealed in their metal tomb with nowhere to run and no help coming, what happens next is beyond any nightmare that mortal minds were meant to comprehend. This is the story of what happens when an entire tank crew gets possessed mid-battle in Warhammer 40,000. This is the story of how the Emperor's faithful servants become monuments to corruption, how war machines blessed in his name transform into demon engines that crave only slaughter, and how the souls of loyal guardsmen are devoured by entities that should not exist. This is the story of the worst fate imaginable for those who serve in the armored regiments of the Astra Militarum. This is the story of the Metal Tomb. The Lehman Russ battle tank is, by the Imperium standards, a simple and reliable machine. Its standard template construct has remained largely unchanged for 10,000 years, a testament to the wisdom of the ancients who designed it during the Golden Age when humanity reached across the stars without fear. The basic configuration crews, 4 men minimum: commander, gunner, loader, and driver. Additional crew members may be required if the tank mounts sponson weapons, those heavy bolters or lascannons that jut from the tank's flanks like the quills of some ancient predator. Commander Sebastian Rourke occupies the cupola, the slightly elevated position that gives him the best view of the battlefield. He stands half exposed to enemy fire, his head and shoulders emerging from the turret hatch, binoculars in hand. His attention split between the chaos of battle around him and the stream of vox chatter crackling through his headset. His is the voice that guides the Emperor's wrath. His are the decisions that mean life or death, not just for his crew, but for the infantry squads that depend on his support. Rourke is 42 years old, ancient by Imperial Guard standards. He has survived 19 major engagements and countless minor skirmishes. His face bears the scars of a grenade that detonated too close during the purge of Hive Tertius. His left hand is augmetic, the original having been burned beyond recovery when a plasma vent ruptured. But his eyes are still sharp, his mind still quick, and his faith in the God Emperor remains absolute. He has led his crew through horrors that would have broken lesser men. He has stood firm when orc hordes crashed against Imperial lines like green tides of muscle and fury. He has directed his gunners' aim against heretic armor and watched with grim satisfaction as traitors burned. But faith and experience mean nothing when the warp decides to reach out and claim you. Below Rourke, sealed inside the turret proper, Gunner Marek Vossen occupies a seat that has molded itself to his body through 3 years of near-constant occupation. He is 26, young enough to still have dreams of surviving this war, and returning to Cadia, old enough to know that such dreams are foolish. His world is the targeting optics, the fire controls, the satisfying recoil that shudders through his body every time the battle cannon speaks. He is committed to memory the reload time for every shell type, the slight drift in the targeting solution when firing on the move, the quirks and preferences of the Emperor's Wrath's machine spirit. Vosson's hands are steady. They have to be. A wasted shell is a crime against the Imperium's war effort. Worse, it could mean the deaths of the guardsmen you were supposed to support. The failure of an offensive, the loss of ground that was purchased with blood and faith. So his hands remain steady, and his aim remains true. And when Rourke's voice crackles through the vox with target coordinates, Vosson's response is immediate and precise. To his left, Loader Kane Thruss wrestles with shells that weigh as much as a small child. Each one must be retrieved from the ready rack, checked for damage despite the rush of combat, loaded into the breech with perfect alignment, and the breech must be closed and locked before Vosson can fire. It is backbreaking work, made worse by the confined space and the constant motion of the tank as Holm navigates the battlefield. Thruss is 31, stocky and strong, his arms corded with muscle from years of lifting shells and maintaining the Emperor's Wrath's weapons systems. He speaks little, preferring to let his actions demonstrate his worth, but the other crew members know they can depend on him absolutely. And below them all, separated from the turret crew by the narrow access hatch and the bulk of the turret basket, sits driver Yannick Holm. His compartment is even more cramped than the gunner's station, a space barely large enough for his body and the array of controls that allow him to guide 30 tons of blessed steel across terrain that would stop a lesser vehicle. Holm sees the world through vision blocks, narrow slits of armored glass that provide only the most limited view of his surroundings. He must trust Rourke's commands implicitly, responding to directions without question, without hesitation. Left track, right track, advance, reverse, stop, fire on the move. The litany of commands has become as familiar as prayer. Holm is the youngest member of the crew at 24. He still has the faith of youth, the belief that the God Emperor watches over his servants and rewards their devotion with protection and victory. The older crew members know better, but they do not discourage his faith. In a universe as dark as this one, any light is welcome, no matter how small or how fragile it might be. These four men have fought together for 3 years. They have shared rations when supply lines were cut. They have maintained the Emperor's wrath together during quiet moments between battles, running blessed oils over sacred mechanisms, performing the rituals taught to them by the regiment's tech priests, speaking the catechisms that keep the machine spirit content. They have saved each other's lives more times than any of them can count. They are brothers, bound not by blood, but by the peculiar intimacy that comes from being sealed inside a metal box while people try to kill you. That intimacy is about to become their doom. The interior conditions of a Lehman Russ during combat operations are, to put it mildly, unpleasant. The temperature fluctuates wildly, baking hot when the engine has been running for hours, cold enough to see your breath during night operations in winter climates. The air is thick with the smell of promethium fumes, gun oil, human sweat, and the metallic tang that comes from spending too long sealed inside a metal container. Ventilation is minimal. The fans struggle to circulate air through the cramped compartments, and when the hatches are sealed for combat, you are breathing the same air over and over, each breath tasting more stale than the last. The noise is overwhelming. The engine roars like a caged beast, a sound so loud and so constant that veteran crew members suffer permanent hearing damage. The clank and clatter of the tracks drowns out all but the most important Vox communications. When the battle cannon fires, the entire tank rocks backward from the recoil, and the sound inside the crew compartment is like standing next to an exploding building. Your bones shake, your teeth rattle, your ears ring for minutes afterward, a high-pitched whine that makes it difficult to hear Rourke's next command. And then there is the motion. The Emperor's Wrath weighs 30 tons, but it does not glide smoothly across the battlefield. It lurches, it rocks, it crashes over obstacles and crashes down on the far side with bone-jarring impacts that leave bruises even through your padded crew suit. When Holm has to perform an emergency turn, the entire crew compartment tilts at an angle that makes you grab for handholds and pray to the Emperor that nothing breaks loose from the racks. More than one loader has been killed by a shell that came free during violent maneuvers. 30 kilograms of high explosive and metal casing transforming into a lethal projectile inside the crew compartment. Vision is limited. Rourke in his cupola has the best view, but even he can only see what is directly around the tank. Vossen sees the world through his targeting optics, a narrow field of view that grants excellent detail but no peripheral awareness. Thruss has no external vision at all unless he moves to one of the vision blocks, and during combat, he is far too busy loading shells to worry about what is happening outside. Holm's vision blocks provide only the most basic awareness of terrain and obstacles immediately in front of the tank. This means that the crew is, in a very real sense, blind. They navigate by Rourke's commands, by the map coordinates crackling through the Vox, by the endless training that has taught them to visualize the battlefield based on fragmentary information. They do not see the full scope of the war raging around them. They see only their immediate surroundings, their target, their objective. Everything else is filtered through Rourke's voice and the limited data provided by their instruments. This isolation from the wider world is what makes tank crews so vulnerable to certain types of psychological warfare. They cannot see the full extent of enemy forces. They cannot know if the battle is being won or lost beyond their immediate vicinity. They can only trust that their commander knows what he is doing, that the Tactica Imperium is being followed, that the God Emperor is watching over them. And when that trust begins to erode, when strange things begin happening inside the crew compartment, when reality itself starts to bend in ways that should not be possible, they have no external reference point to reassure them that everything is still normal. The Vox system is their lifeline. Through it, Rourke maintains contact with other tanks in the squadron, with infantry command, with artillery support. Through it, Vossen receives targeting data. Through it, the entire crew maintains their connection to the wider Imperium, to the war effort, to the faith that sustains them. But the Vox is not perfect. It crackles with static. It cuts out at inopportune moments. Sometimes you hear voices that should not be there, fragments of conversations from other units bleeding through on your frequency. Sometimes you hear nothing but white noise, a rushing sound like distant waves that makes it hard to concentrate on your duties. And sometimes, during those moments when reality grows thin and the warp presses close to the material universe, you hear other things, voices that speak in languages that hurt to hear, laughter that comes from no human throat, whispers that promise things no sane person should desire. Most crew members learn to ignore these aberrations, to chalk them up to Vox system malfunction or enemy interference. They turn the volume down, they adjust the frequency, they focus on their duties and try not to think about what they might have heard. But you cannot ignore it forever, especially not when the whispers start using your name. The crew compartment of the Emperor's Wrath measures approximately 4 meters long, 2 meters wide, and less than 2 meters tall. It is a space designed to house complex machinery and weaponry first, with crew accommodation as an afterthought. There is no room for personal effects beyond what can fit in the tiny storage lockers welded to the interior walls. There is no privacy. When Thruss needs to relieve himself during a long combat operation, he does so into a waste container, while the rest of the crew politely pretends not to notice. When Vossen's leg cramps from hours in the gunner's seat, he cannot stand and stretch without bumping into Thruss or hitting his head on the low ceiling. This enforced closeness means that the crew knows each other's habits with uncomfortable intimacy. Vossen knows that Thruss mutters prayers under his breath when loading armor-piercing shells, believing they need extra blessing to penetrate the thickest enemy armor. Thruss knows that Vossen taps his right foot 3 times before firing, a nervous habit that developed during his first combat engagement. Holm knows that Rourke shifts his weight from foot to foot when he is anxious about something he has seen through his binoculars but has not yet shared with the crew. Rourke knows that Holm's breathing becomes shallow and rapid when the tank is taking heavy fire, though the young driver never lets it affect his performance. They know each other better than they know their own families. They have to. Their survival depends on this knowledge, on the ability to predict each other's actions, to work in perfect coordination despite the noise and the chaos and the constant threat of death. They are less like a military unit and more like a single organism with 4 bodies, each performing its specialized function in service to the whole. This makes the horror of possession even worse, because when one of them begins to change, when the warp finds a crack in their faith and begins to pour its corruption through that crack, the others notice immediately, and there is nowhere to go, nowhere to hide, no way to escape from the thing that used to be their brother, as it transforms into something that should not exist in this reality. The first sign is always subtle. Perhaps Holmes' responses to Rourke's commands become slightly delayed, as if he is listening to a voice other than his commander's. Perhaps Thruss loads a shell with his left hand instead of his right, a small deviation from established procedure that would go unnoticed in any other context but here, in this enclosed space where every movement has been practiced 10,000 times, stands out like a scream. Perhaps Vossen's aim drifts slightly off target, and when Rourke questions it, his response is slurred, as if he is speaking through a mouth that no longer quite fits his face. These are the moments when intervention might still be possible. If Rourke notices the signs early enough, if he calls for an immediate combat halt and unseals the hatches, if he orders a field chaplain to examine his crew before the corruption spreads too far, there might be a chance, a slim chance. The ecclesiarchy has rituals for this, prayers that can drive out minor demonic influence if applied quickly and with absolute faith. The commissariat has its own methods, more brutal but equally effective. Summary execution of the suspected possessed, followed by cleansing flames and the blessing of a new crew member to replace the loss. But in the heat of battle, these options are rarely available. The hatches cannot be opened when you are under enemy fire. The chaplains are busy with their own duties, ministering to the infantry or leading them in prayer before assaults. The commissars are elsewhere, maintaining discipline in the rear echelons or executing cowards to inspire courage in the ranks. And besides, these signs are so small, so easy to dismiss as stress or fatigue, or the simple human error that occurs even in the best trained crews. So Rourke makes a note to watch his crew more closely, and he continues giving orders, and the Emperor's wrath continues fighting, and the corruption continues to spread. To understand what happens when a tank crew becomes possessed, we must first understand the nature of demonic possession itself. The warp, that roiling sea of psychic energy that underlies all reality, is home to entities that hunger for mortal souls with a desperation that borders on madness. These demons, these fragments of the Chaos God's infinite malice, exist in a state of constant starvation. In the warp, they feed on emotion, on thought, on the psychic emanations that bleed through from the material universe. But these are pale shadows of true sustenance. What they truly crave is the experience of physical reality, the sensation of existing in a body of flesh and bone, the ability to directly interact with the material world and inflict suffering upon it. Possession allows them to achieve this by forcing their way into a mortal host, by overwhelming the victim's soul and taking control of their physical form. Demons can experience the material universe in all its violent, tactile glory. They can taste blood. They can feel pain, both their own and that which they inflict on others. They can speak with mortal voices and touch the physical world with mortal hands. For entities that exist as shapeless masses of malevolent will in the warp's depths, this is ecstasy beyond description. The process of possession typically begins with the identification of a vulnerable target. Demons are drawn to certain emotional states like moths to flame. Khornat demons seek those consumed by rage or bloodlust. Slaaneshi entities gravitate toward those experiencing extreme sensations, whether pleasure or pain. Nurglite demons are attracted to despair and acceptance of inevitable decay. Tzeentchian horrors hunt those who plot and scheme, whose minds are filled with ambition and the desire for forbidden knowledge. But demons are also opportunistic. When a Geller field fails aboard a ship traveling through the warp, they do not carefully select their victims. They pour through the breach in reality, like water through a ruptured dam, claiming whatever souls are nearest and most accessible. Similarly, when a battlefield becomes saturated with warp energy, perhaps due to the presence of powerful psykers or the thinning of the barrier between dimensions caused by mass slaughter and suffering, demons will attempt to possess anyone they can reach. A tank crew represents a peculiarly attractive target for demonic possession. They are isolated from the rest of their army, sealed inside their vehicle, dependent on each other for survival. The crew compartment is small enough that corruption can spread from one member to another with terrible speed, yet large enough that the initial victim might not be immediately restrained before the possession is complete. And once one crew member is possessed, the demon can use that body to physically assault the others, to whisper corrupting words directly into their ears, to perform rituals that weaken the barrier between reality and unreality even further. The actual moment of possession varies depending on the strength of the victim's will and the power of the demon attempting to claim them. For a lesser demon attempting to possess a man of strong faith, it might be a prolonged battle of wills, the victim aware of the alien presence in his mind and struggling against it, even as his body begins to move in ways he does not command. For a greater demon overwhelming someone whose faith has already been shaken, it might be instantaneous. The victim's consciousness simply snuffed out like a candle in a hurricane, replaced by something ancient and malevolent that now pilots their flesh like a stolen vehicle. In either case, the physical effects are unmistakable once the possession advances beyond the initial stages. The victim's eyes change first, the pupils dilating or contracting to unnatural sizes, or the entire eye turning black, or beginning to glow with a sickly light that has no source in this reality. The skin takes on a strange quality, too pale or too flushed, sometimes beginning to show veins that pulse with colors that should not exist. The voice changes, becoming deeper or higher, acquiring strange harmonics that hurt to hear, sometimes speaking words in languages that were never meant for human tongues. And then the transformations begin in earnest. Because while a demon might be content to simply pilot a mortal body for a time, enjoying the novel experience of physical sensation, it will inevitably begin to reshape that body to better suit its nature. Khornate possession results in enhanced musculature, the growth of horns or fangs, skin hardening into a natural armor. Slaaneshi possession brings unnatural grace and horrifying beauty, the body becoming an obscene work of art that draws the eye despite its wrongness. Nurglite possession brings decay, flesh rotting even as the host continues to move, body swelling with pestilence and disease. Tzeentchian possession is the most unpredictable, the body warping in impossible ways, additional limbs sprouting, flesh becoming translucent to reveal geometries that should not exist within a human form. But these transformations take time, anywhere from minutes to hours, depending on the demon's power and the resistance offered by the host. And during that time, while the possession is still in its early stages, the victim might appear almost normal. They might even retain enough of their original personality to respond to their name, to follow orders, to perform their duties. This is perhaps the most insidious aspect of demonic corruption. The possessed often do not immediately reveal themselves as monsters. They hide among their fellows, spreading corruption through word and deed, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. For a tank crew, this means that by the time they realize one of their number has been possessed, it is often far too late to prevent the corruption from spreading to the others. The battle for Quintus 7 had been raging for 3 weeks when the Emperor's Wrath rolled into position alongside the other tanks of the 217th 2nd Squadron. The objective was simple enough: support the infantry advance through the ruins of Hive Tertius, clear out the heretic forces that had fortified the ruins, and secure the approach to the primary spaceport. Simple, but not easy. The heretics had been entrenching for months, turning every collapsed building into a fortress, every rubble-strewn street into a killing ground. Commander Rourke had led his crew through worse. He positioned the Emperor's Wrath hull down behind a collapsed manufactorum wall, the battle cannon elevated to provide fire support over the obstacle, while minimizing the tank's exposure to enemy anti-armor weapons. Vossen had his targeting optics focused on the approach the infantry would use, ready to suppress any heretic positions that opened fire on the advancing guardsmen. Thruss had shells ready, a mix of high explosive for fortifications and armor-piercing for the enemy's light vehicles. Holm kept the engine idling, ready to reverse them into cover or reposition as circumstances demanded. It should have been routine. Another day, another battle, another step closer to victory or death. The first sign that something was wrong came 30 minutes into the engagement. Vossen was tracking a heretic heavy weapons team that had set up in the 3rd floor of a ruined habitation block when his targeting reticle suddenly flickered. Not the normal static that sometimes affected the optics during heavy combat. This was different. For just a moment, the crosshairs seemed to twist into a shape that made his eyes water, and he thought he saw movement in his peripheral vision, inside the crew compartment, where there should have been nothing but Thruss and the familiar equipment. He blinked hard, shook his head, and the targeting reticle was normal again. Stress, he told himself. Fatigue. They had been fighting almost continuously for weeks, and even the best soldiers experience optical illusions when they are exhausted. He adjusted his aim and fired, the high explosive shell reducing the heretic position to rubble, and forgot about the incident. He should not have. 10 minutes later, Thruss spoke for the first time in an hour. This was not unusual. The loader was never talkative during combat, but his words were strange. "The walls are thin here," he said, his voice flat and toneless through the vox. "I can hear them scratching." Vossen glanced over at him, frowning. "Hear what scratching? What are you talking about?" Thruss did not respond. He was already loading another shell, his movements mechanical and precise, his face expressionless. Vossen exchanged a look with Rourke through the mirror that allowed the commander to keep an eye on his gunner, but Rourke only shrugged. Strange comments were common enough during prolonged combat. Men said odd things when they were tired and frightened, and breathing recycled air thick with promethium fumes. But then Holmes spoke up from the driver's compartment below. "Commander, I'm seeing movement on the left track, something crawling on the exterior." Rourke immediately swiveled in his cupola, binoculars raised, scanning the left side of the tank. "Negative, driver. Left track is clear. No contacts. But I can see it through the vision block. It's right there. It's got too many legs. It's trying to get inside." A cold feeling began to spread through Vossen's chest. Holm was not the type to imagine things. He was steady, reliable, faithful. If he said he saw something, then from his perspective, he did see something, which meant either the vision block was malfunctioning, showing him images that were not there, or something was wrong with Holm himself. "Driver, run a diagnostic on your vision blocks," Rourke ordered, his voice carefully neutral. "Might be damage from enemy fire distorting your view." There was a pause, filled only with the rumble of the engine and the distant sound of explosions as the infantry exchanged fire with the heretics. Then Holmes' voice came back, and it was wrong somehow, the words strangely emphasized, as if he was speaking a language he had only just learned. "Diagnostics show all systems functioning within normal parameters. But it is still there, Commander. It is looking at me. It knows my name." Vossen felt his hands tightening on the fire controls. This was beyond a simple optical illusion. This was beyond stress or fatigue. This was something else entirely, something that made the small hairs on the back of his neck stand up. something that triggered every survival instinct honed by 3 years of warfare. "Commander," he said quietly, "we should halt combat operations. Get a tech priest to check the systems, maybe a chaplain." Before Rourke could respond, Thruss laughed. It was a sound Vossen had never heard from the quiet loader, a bubbling, inappropriate laugh that seemed to contain far more amusement than any sane person should feel in the middle of a battle. "A chaplain will not help," Thruss said, and his voice was different now, layered, as if multiple people were speaking in unison. "They are already here. They have always been here, waiting, watching. The walls are thin, and we have made them thinner with our violence." Vossen spun in his seat, bringing his las pistol up in the same motion. The weapon had been a gift from his father, blessed by the regimental chaplain, a comfort more than a serious weapon in the context of tank warfare. But now he pointed it at Thruss with shaking hands, and what he saw made his faith waver for the first time in his life. Thruss was still loading shells. His hands moved with their normal efficiency, retrieving a shell from the rack, sliding it into the breech, closing and locking the mechanism. But his eyes were wrong. They had turned completely black. No white, no iris, just solid pools of darkness that seemed to drink in the light from the crew compartment's dim illumination. And his skin had taken on a greyish cast, as if the blood had stopped flowing beneath it, as if he was already dead but his body had not yet realized it. "Thruss," Vossen said, and his voice was barely a whisper. "Thruss, what is happening to you?" The thing that had been Thruss smiled, and its teeth had grown too numerous for a human mouth, overlapping each other in rows like a shark's. "He is still here," it said in that terrible multi-layered voice, "screaming, but he cannot be heard over the others. There are so many voices now, so many hungry, eager voices." Rourke's voice crackled through the vox, tight with barely controlled panic. "All crew, emergency halt. Seal your stations and do not, I repeat, do not approach loader Thruss. Gunner Vossen, keep that las pistol trained on him. Driver Holm, can you hear me?" There was no response from below. "Driver Holm, respond immediately, or I will assume you are compromised." Still nothing. Just the rumble of the engine and the sound of Thruss breathing, though breathing was perhaps the wrong word for the wet, rattling noise emerging from his chest. Vossen kept the las pistol pointed at Thruss, but his hands were shaking so badly, he was not sure he could hit anything even at this range. This was not supposed to happen. Possession by daemons was something that happened to psychers, to the weak-willed, to those who consorted with heretics and traitors. It was not something that happened to loyal soldiers of the Imperial Guard, men who had served faithfully for years, men who prayed every day to the God Emperor and wore their faith like armor. But the evidence was right in front of him, impossible to deny. Thruss was possessed. Something had crawled inside him and was wearing his body like a suit of flesh. And if Thruss was possessed, then Holm's silence suggested that the driver had also been claimed, which meant that of the 4-man crew of the Emperor's Wrath, half were already lost to corruption. "We need to get out," Vossen said, his voice rising toward panic. "Commander, we need to abandon the tank, now, before it spreads to us." "Negative," Rourke said, and there was steel in his voice now, the iron will of a man who had faced death many times and refused to bow to it. "We are still in a combat zone. Abandoning the tank means death from enemy fire, and it means leaving a possessed vehicle in the middle of our lines. We deal with this here and now, before it gets worse." But it was already getting worse. Much worse, because as Vossen watched in horror, Thruss began to change in earnest. His skin split along his forearms, the flesh peeling back to reveal not bone and muscle, but something that writhed and pulsed with its own terrible life. His spine curved, vertebrae cracking audibly as they reshaped themselves, forcing him into a hunched posture that no human could maintain. And his mouth kept growing wider, the jaw unhinging like a snake's, filled with far too many teeth, all of them sharp, all of them hungry. "The feast begins," the Thruss thing said, and it lunged. Vossen fired. The last pistol's beam caught the creature in the chest, burning through fabric and flesh, but it did not stop. It did not even slow down. It crashed into him with impossible strength, bearing him backward, and he felt clawed fingers that should not exist close around his throat. The targeting optics were destroyed in the impact, shattering into fragments of armored glass that cut his face. The fire controls sparked as they were wrenched from their mountings. Above, Rourke was screaming orders, his voice nearly lost in the chaos. Below, something was hammering on the access hatch that led to the driver's compartment, a rhythmic pounding that sounded like it would breach the armored door in seconds. Vossen tried to pray. He tried to speak the words that had been drilled into him since childhood, the Emperor's benedictions that were supposed to provide protection against the warp's predations. But he could not breathe, could not force air past the constriction of those terrible fingers, and the words died unspoken in his mind. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Thruss's face, or what remained of it, leaning close to his own, the black eyes, the too many teeth. And behind those features, barely visible through the corruption that had consumed them, a flicker of recognition. Thruss was still in there somewhere, trapped inside his own mutating flesh, aware of what he was doing but unable to stop it. Then the darkness became absolute, and Gunnar Marek Vossen ceased to be. What Vossen could not see, trapped in his final moments, was what was happening in the rest of the crew compartment. Rourke had drawn his bolt pistol and was trying to bring it to bear on the Thruss thing, but the angle was wrong, and he could not get a clear shot without risking hitting Vossen. Not that it mattered. Even as Rourke fumbled with his weapon, the access hatch to the driver's compartment exploded inward, torn from its hinges by something that had once been Yannick Holm, but was now a twisted mockery of human form. The transformation that had consumed Holm had taken a different path than the one affecting Thruss. Where Thruss's body had become predatory, almost bestial, Holm's had become something else. His flesh had turned translucent, revealing structures beneath that looked like organs but could not possibly function by any laws of biology. Colors that should not exist pulsed through those, not organs. And his limbs had elongated, joints bending in too many places, fingers stretching into tendrils that ended in barbed hooks. This was Tsen-Chian corruption, the mark of the changer of ways, the god of schemes and transformation and forbidden knowledge. The demon that had claimed Holm was not content to simply wear his flesh. It was remaking that flesh into something new, something that embodied change itself, a constantly shifting mass of meat and bone and impossible geometries that hurt to look at directly. "No more waiting," the Holm thing said, and its voice was like crystal chimes mixed with screams. "No more pretending. We are free. We are manifest. We are hunger made flesh." It flowed up through the access hatch with liquid grace, moving in ways that defied physics, its elongated limbs finding purchase on surfaces that should not have supported weight. Rourke finally got his bolt pistol aimed and fired, the mass-reactive rounds exploding against the creature's torso, blowing chunks of corrupted flesh across the crew compartment. But it did not stop. Tsen-Chian demons are notoriously difficult to kill, their bodies refusing to acknowledge damage in any consistent way. The wounds Rourke inflicted sealed themselves almost immediately, the flesh flowing like water to fill the gaps, and the creature kept coming. Its tendrils wrapped around Rourke's arm, the barbed hooks sinking deep into flesh, and it pulled him down from the cupola with irresistible strength. Rourke managed one final Vox transmission before the creature bore him to the deck. "All Imperial forces, this is Tank Commander Sebastian Rourke of the Emperor's Wrath. We are compromised. Demonic possession. All units maintain distance. Requesting immediate commissariat response with authorization for summary." The transmission cut off as the Holm thing's tendrils found his throat, constricting, cutting off air and blood flow. Rourke tried to fight, tried to bring his bolt pistol to bear for one last shot, but his strength was already fading. The world dimmed at the edges of his vision. His lungs burned. His faith, which had sustained him through 19 major engagements and countless smaller battles, wavered for the first time. And in that moment of wavering, in that instant when his absolute certainty in the Emperor's protection faltered, something else slipped in. Rourke felt it enter his mind like a knife sliding between his ribs. It was cold and vast and ancient beyond human comprehension. It was aware of him in ways that were deeply violating, examining his memories and thoughts and fears with clinical interest. It spoke to him in a voice that resonated in his very soul, and what it said was both a promise and a threat. You have been alone all this time, warrior, fighting, dying. For what? For a corpse emperor who does not hear your prayers? We hear them, we answer them. Join us. Let go of your foolish faith and embrace the truth. Embrace the change. Embrace the power we offer. For a moment, just a moment, Sebastian Rourke was tempted. Because the demon was right. He had been fighting for so long, watching men die under his command, shouldering the burden of command without acknowledgement or reward, all in service to a god emperor who had not walked among men for 10,000 years. What if it was all for nothing? What if the preachers were wrong and the heretics were right? What if the Chaos Gods offered more to their servants than the Imperium ever had? But then Rourke remembered his father, who had died serving the Emperor on some nameless world in the Eastern Fringe. He remembered his first tank crew, killed when their Lehman Russ took a direct hit from a battle cannon and brewed up, consuming them in flames before they could escape. He remembered every guardsman who had followed his orders, who had trusted him to lead them well, who had died believing that their sacrifice meant something. He remembered why he fought, not for reward, not for acknowledgement, not even for the promise of the Emperor's protection. He fought because someone had to stand against the darkness, because if good men did nothing, then evil would triumph, because faith was not about reward, but about duty. No, he whispered through his constricted throat. The Emperor protects. The demon laughed, a sound like breaking mirrors. So be it. If you will not join us willingly, we will take you by force. Your faith will make the corruption so much sweeter. And then it poured into him, overwhelming his resistance, drowning his consciousness in a tide of alien thought and malevolent will. Rourke tried to hold on, tried to maintain some core of himself that remained untainted. But it was like trying to hold back the ocean with your bare hands. The demon was too strong, too old, too patient. It had been waiting in the warp for millennia for an opportunity like this, and it would not be denied. Sebastian Rourke's last coherent thought before his mind was subsumed was a prayer. Not one of the official litanies taught by the ecclesiarchy, not a formal benediction from the imperial creed, just a simple, heartfelt plea. Emperor, forgive me. I tried. Then he was gone, and something else wore his face. The crew compartment of the Emperor's Wrath had become a charnel house. 3 of the 4 crew members were now possessed, their bodies transforming into demonic parodies of human form. Blood and stranger fluids pooled on the deck plates. The air itself had taken on a greasy, contaminated quality, as if reality was rejecting what was happening within this small space, but lacked the strength to prevent it. And in the midst of this horror, Marek Vossen's body began to stir. He should have been dead. The thrust thing's fingers had crushed his windpipe, cutting off oxygen to his brain long enough to cause irreversible damage. But death, in the context of demonic possession, is a fluid concept. The demons that had claimed his crewmates wanted him alive, or at least wanted his body functional. They had use for a 4th vessel, a 4th set of hands to control the tank's weapons, a 4th soul to corrupt and consume. So Vossen's heart was made to beat again, even though it should have stopped. His lungs were made to draw breath, even though they had collapsed. His brain was forced back into function, neurons firing in patterns that were no longer entirely human. And into that resurrected flesh, a 4th demon poured its essence. This one was different from the others. Where Thruss had been claimed by a demon of violence, and Holm by a demon of change, and Rourke by something that whispered of forbidden knowledge, Vossen's possessor was simpler in its nature. It was hunger. Pure, absolute, never satisfied hunger for sensation, for experience, for the violent pleasure of inflicting suffering. A Slaneshi demon, then, the Dark Prince's gift to the crew of the Emperor's wrath. Vosson's eyes snapped open, and they were no longer brown. They had become a deep, hypnotic purple, the color of bruised flesh, and they glowed with their own internal light. His broken windpipe knitted itself back together in seconds, flesh and cartilage reforming with wet, clicking sounds. His skin took on an unnatural perfection, all scars and blemishes fading away, leaving him looking younger than he had in years. He sat up, moving with inhuman grace, and looked around the crew compartment with eyes that saw far more than mortal vision should allow. He could see the currents of warp energy flowing through the enclosed space, thick and viscous like oil, feeding the transformations that were consuming his brothers. He could see the thinness of reality here, how close this small bubble of Imperium was to the infinite depths of the warp. He could see the Emperor's wrath itself, not just its physical structure of metal and ceramite, but its machine spirit, that fragment of consciousness that inhabited every blessed vehicle in the Imperium's arsenal. And he could see that the machine spirit was screaming. Whatever awareness inhabited the Emperor's wrath, it knew that something was terribly wrong. It could feel the corruption spreading through its crew compartment like an infection. It tried to resist, tried to shut down systems that the possessed might use, tried to trigger alarms that would alert nearby Imperial forces to the danger, but it was limited in what it could do. A tank's machine spirit is not a sophisticated artificial intelligence. It is something more basic, more primal, a blessing of function, a prayer made manifest in circuitry and steel. It can guide a crew's hands, ensure that mechanisms work when they should, provide good fortune in battle. But it cannot physically prevent its crew from using the controls. The thing that had been, Vosson smiled, and the expression was terrible to behold. Too wide, too knowing, too hungry. "We have a tank," it said, its voice a purr of satisfaction. "We have weapons, we have mobility, we have the perfect vessel for our desires." The thrust demon nodded, its too many teeth clicking together in a sound like applause. Yes, the feast can begin properly now. So many targets, so much blood to spill." The Holm demon had already moved to the commander's position, its elongated body coiling into the cupola in ways that should not have been possible given its size. "I can see them," it said, its crystal chime voice filled with delight. "All the little soldiers, all the faithful servants of the corpse god. They do not yet know what we have become. We can kill so many before they realize." The Rorke demon, the last to fully manifest, raised one hand for silence. Of the four, it retained the most human appearance, though its eyes burned with unnatural intelligence, and its skin had taken on a faintly luminescent quality. When it spoke, its voice carried an authority that the others immediately recognized and obeyed. "We must be cunning," it said. "If we reveal ourselves too quickly, they will destroy this vehicle before we can accomplish anything of worth. But if we maintain the pretense of loyalty for just a little while longer, we can inflict such exquisite damage upon these fools and their false emperor." The possessed crew of the Emperor's wrath shared a look of perfect understanding. 4 demons inhabiting 4 mortal shells, united in their purpose: to kill, to corrupt, to spread the influence of the Chaos Gods as far and as widely as possible before they were inevitably stopped. The tank, blessed by the Mechanicus and anointed in the Emperor's name, had become something else entirely. Not quite a demon engine, not yet, but something in between. A possessed vehicle, its controls operated by corrupted crew, its weapons about to be turned against the very army it was supposed to support. And the worst part, the truly horrifying part, was that somewhere deep inside the warped flesh of each possessed crew member, the original souls still existed. Thruss could feel his demon manipulating his body, could scream in silent horror as his hands performed actions he would never have chosen. Holm was aware of every transformation, every shift of his flesh into impossible shapes, powerless to stop it. Rourke felt the demon rifling through his memories, learning the protocols and codes and tactical knowledge of an Imperial tank commander, preparing to use that information to maximum destructive effect. And Vossen, or what remained of him, experienced every sensation the Slaaneshi demon inflicted and enjoyed, felt the pleasure it took in inhabiting his flesh, was forced to share in its anticipation of the violence to come. They were prisoners in their own bodies, conscious but powerless, aware but unable to act, and they would remain so until either the demons were banished or their bodies were destroyed. Death would be a mercy, death would be release. But death was not coming quickly. The first victim of the possessed Emperor's wrath was a squad of Cadian infantry advancing through the ruins toward their next objective. They had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. The Emperor's wrath was a known asset. Tank Commander Rourke was a proven leader, and the tank had been providing fire support all morning without incident. When it rumbled forward from its hull-down position and moved to support their advance more closely, the infantry squad leader actually waved in acknowledgement, grateful for the additional firepower. He was still waving when the Emperor's Wrath's battle cannon fired, and the high-explosive shell landed directly in the middle of the squad. 10 men died instantly, their bodies reduced to component atoms by the blast. 3 more were wounded badly enough that they would die within minutes, screaming for medics who were too far away and too busy with other casualties to reach them in time. The squad's Vox operator managed to get off a frantic transmission before a burst from the tank's hull-mounted heavy bolter cut him in half. "Emperor's Wrath has gone rogue. Repeat, Emperor's Wrath is firing on friendly forces. Need immediate..." The transmission ended as another shell landed close enough to reduce the remaining members of the squad to bloody smears on the rubble. Inside the crew compartment, the Vossen demon laughed with pure delight. "Did you see how they died? Did you see the surprise on their faces? The betrayal? The fear? Exquisite. Absolutely exquisite." The thrust demon was loading shells with frantic speed, its mutated body adapted now to handle ammunition even more efficiently than before. Each shell that slammed into the breach was loaded with the demon's malevolent will, and when it fired, the shells did not simply explode. They carried traces of warp taint with them, and those caught in the blast radius did not merely die. Their souls were shredded, torn apart by energies that should not exist in real space, denied even the small comfort of whatever afterlife might await faithful servants of the Emperor. The Holm demon guided the tank with impossible precision, knowing exactly where to position the Emperor's wrath for maximum effect, anticipating the movements of fleeing soldiers with precognitive accuracy granted by its sentient nature. It was no longer limited by the narrow vision blocks. It could see through the very metal of the hull, perceive the battlefield in dimensions beyond the normal 3, know where targets would be before they arrived there. And the Rourke demon coordinated it all with the tactical acumen of a veteran tank commander, combined with the malevolent intelligence of an ancient warp entity. It knew which targets would cause the most panic when destroyed. It knew how to position the tank to make counterfire difficult. It knew exactly what to say over the Vox to delay any organized response to their rampage. "This is Tank Commander Rourke," it said, its voice a perfect imitation of the man it had consumed. "We are under attack by infiltrating heretics. Crew has been compromised. Requesting immediate assistance. Coordinates." And then it transmitted false coordinates that would send any responding forces to the wrong location, buying precious minutes for the slaughter to continue. The Emperor's wrath carved a path of destruction through the Imperial lines, its weapons speaking with terrible efficiency. Infantry squads were obliterated. A Chimera transport attempting to flank them was hit broadside by an armor-piercing shell that detonated its promethium stores, turning the vehicle into a rolling fireball that incinerated its cargo of guardsmen. A sentinel walker trying to get close enough to use its lascannon was crushed beneath the tank's treads, the pilot's screams audible even over the engine noise, until the weight of 30 tons of possessed steel silenced him forever. The carnage lasted for 7 minutes before organized resistance began to form. 7 minutes of absolute chaos as the 217th Armored Regiment tried to understand what was happening, as officers shouted contradictory orders, as infantry broke and ran from the tank they had thought was their protector. 7 minutes during which the Emperor's wrath killed 143 Imperial soldiers and destroyed or damaged 9 other vehicles. Then, the counterattack began. The first shot came from Lieutenant Kael's Lehman Russ, positioned 300 meters away and blessed with a clear line of sight. Kael had served alongside Rourke for 2 years. They had shared rations during the siege of Hive Primus. They had fought back-to-back during the Orc incursion on Quintus 9, but Kael did not hesitate when his gunner confirmed target lock on the Emperor's wrath. He gave the order to fire, and his voice did not waver. Target locked. Fire for effect. The armor-piercing shell hit the Emperor's wrath on its right sponson, penetrating the side armor and detonating inside the crew compartment. A normal tank would have been crippled. The blast should have killed everyone inside, should have triggered ammunition detonations that would reduce the vehicle to scrap. But this was no longer a normal tank. The explosion tore through the crew compartment, and the thrust demon was directly in the blast radius. Its body was shredded, chunks of demonically enhanced flesh spattering across the interior, and for a moment it seemed as if the creature might be destroyed. But demons are not mortal. They do not die as humans die. Even as its body fell apart, its essence remained, a core of malevolent will that refused to be banished. The scattered pieces of flesh began to writhe. They flowed together, merging and reforming, and within seconds, the thrust demon was whole again, though its new form was even more grotesque than before. The battle damage had allowed it to reshape itself without the constraints of appearing even remotely human. Now it was pure predator, a thing of claws and teeth and muscle. Its head elongated into something that resembled a warp-twisted canine more than anything that had once been a man. "They hurt us," it snarled, and all pretense of using human speech was gone. The words came out as a series of growls and snaps that should not have been intelligible but somehow conveyed meaning regardless. "They will pay. We will eat their hearts while they still beat." The Rourke demon nodded. "Indeed, but we must be clever about it. More tanks are targeting us now. We cannot withstand sustained fire from the entire regiment. We must relocate and continue our work from a different position." The Holm demons sent the Emperor's wrath into motion, the tank accelerating with a speed that should not have been possible for a vehicle of its mass. It crashed through a ruined wall, sending chunks of rockcrete flying, and disappeared into the maze of destroyed buildings that had once been a section of Hive Tertius's residential district. Behind them, Lieutenant Kael watched them go, and felt a cold certainty settle over him. Rourke was gone. His friend, his brother-in-arms, was lost to whatever corruption had claimed the Emperor's wrath. There would be no rescue, no exorcism, no salvation. There was only one mercy left to offer. All tanks, focus fire on the Emperor's wrath. Target designation Alpha priority. Shoot to destroy. Emperor, preserve our souls. We're putting down one of our own. The chase began. What followed was a nightmare of urban combat as the possessed Emperor's wrath played a deadly game of cat and mouse with the rest of the 217th Armored Regiment. The tank would appear from behind ruins, fire a devastating salvo that destroyed or crippled whatever vehicles were in range, then disappear again before return fire could be properly coordinated. The demons inside had perfect coordination, reacting to threats faster than any human crew could manage, and they had shed all concern for their own survival. They fought with the reckless abandon of those who knew they would eventually be stopped, but were determined to inflict maximum damage before that inevitable end. The body count climbed. 20 dead, 50, 100. The Emperor's wrath left a trail of burning vehicles and shattered bodies through the ruins of Hive Tertius, and with each kill, the corruption intensified. The warp energy bleeding from the possessed tank was palpable, even to those without psychic sensitivity. Guardsmen who got too close reported feelings of nausea, overwhelming dread, whispers in languages they did not know promising things they should not want. The tank itself was changing. The damage it had sustained should have immobilized it, but instead, the breached armor was sealing itself, not with metal, but with something organic, a cancerous growth of flesh and bone that spread across the hull like a disease. The tracks left smoking gouges in the ground where they passed, the metal having become so tainted that it burned the very earth. The exhaust no longer smoked with normal promethium fumes, but belched gouts of multicolored vapor that caused hallucinations in anyone who breathed it. And the machine spirit, that fragment of blessing and sanctified function that had inhabited the Emperor's wrath for decades, finally gave up its struggle. It could not fight the corruption any longer. It could not maintain the distinction between blessed vehicle and demonic engine. It surrendered, and in surrendering, it was consumed, transformed into something new. The Emperor's wrath was becoming a true demon engine now, the transformation nearly complete. But before that transformation could finish, before the tank could evolve into something even more dangerous, the commissariat arrived. Commissar Vadim Kraus was a man who had seen too much horror to be shocked by any new manifestation of it. He had executed cowards, put down psycho-caused riots, faced down charging orc hordes with nothing but his bolt pistol and his absolute faith in the Emperor's divine will. When he received word of a possessed tank running amok through the Imperial lines, he did not panic. He did not hesitate. He simply requisitioned a Valkyrie gunship, assembled a squad of his most trusted stormtroopers, and set out to end the threat. His plan was simple and brutal. He would drop directly onto the Emperor's wrath from above, breach the crew compartment with melter charges, and personally execute whatever demonic abominations he found inside. Then he would call down an artillery strike on the tank itself, ensuring that nothing remained but molten slag and ash. The Valkyrie screamed over the ruins of Hive Tertius, flying low enough that its downwash kicked up clouds of dust and debris. The Emperor's wrath was moving through what had once been a market district, its weapons searching for new targets. It did not notice the approaching aircraft until too late. Kraus and his stormtroopers dropped on rappel lines, descending onto the tank's hull with practiced efficiency. The possessed crew reacted immediately, but they were trapped inside the vehicle, unable to bring their weapons to bear on targets directly above them. The Holm Demon tried to throw the tank into violent maneuvers that would shake the attackers loose, but Kraus and his men were veterans of boarding actions against far more mobile targets than this. The melter charges were placed on the turret hatch with textbook precision. 3 seconds later, they detonated, the superheated blast cutting through even the blessed ceramite of the tank's armor. The hatch blew inward, and Kraus dropped through the smoking hole without hesitation, his bolt pistol already firing before his boots hit the deck. What he saw inside the crew compartment would haunt the nightmares of lesser men for the rest of their lives. But Kraus was not a lesser man. He took in the transformed crew members, the warped flesh and impossible anatomies, the blood and the wrongness, and the palpable presence of the warp itself, and he felt only disgust and determination. "In the name of the God Emperor of mankind," he roared, his voice cutting through the chaos, "I pronounce you traitors to the Imperium and grant you the mercy of immediate execution." His bolt pistols spoke, mass reactive rounds punching into the Vossen demon's chest and detonating, blowing the creature apart in a spray of blood and warp-tainted tissue. The stormtroopers followed him through the breach, their hellguns chattering, hot-shot las beams carving through demonic flesh with contemptuous efficiency. The thrust demon died next, its predatory form simply too large and too obvious a target to survive the concentrated fire. It tried to fight back, its claws raking across a stormtrooper's armor and leaving deep gouges, but a hellgun burst to its head, ended its struggles. The body collapsed, already beginning to dissolve as the demon's animating essence was forced back into the warp. The Holm demon proved more difficult, its Tsienkian nature granting it unnatural resilience and the ability to bend reality in small ways that made it hard to target accurately. It twisted through dimensions that should not exist, phasing partially out of reality, and its crystalline voice shrieked words of power that caused 3 of the stormtroopers to clutch their heads in agony. But Kraus was no normal human. His faith was a fortress, and the demon's words could not penetrate it. He walked forward through the reality-bending nonsense, placed his bolt pistol against what passed for the creature's head, and pulled the trigger. That left only the Rorke demon. It had been the last to fully manifest and the most powerful of the 4. It had consumed not just Rorke's body, but all of his knowledge, all of his experience, all of the tactical acumen that had made him one of the regiment's finest tank commanders. And it had used that knowledge to prepare for exactly this scenario. As Kraus turned to face it, the demon smiled with Rorke's face, and for just a moment, the commissar saw a flicker of the man he had known. Then the demon raised its hand, and reality inside the crew compartment twisted. The stormtroopers opened fire, but their shots went wide, bending away from their target as if the very laws of physics had been rewritten. Kraus fired his bolt pistol, and the round simply vanished in mid-flight, absorbed into whatever impossible space the demon had created around itself. "You cannot kill what you cannot touch, Commissar," the Rorke demon said, and its voice was terrible in its familiarity because it sounded exactly like the man Kraus had known and respected. "And you cannot touch what exists in more dimensions than your limited senses can perceive. We could do this forever, demon and human, locked in an eternal struggle within this metal tomb." "No," Kraus said, his voice flat and certain. "We could not, because unlike you, creature, I am willing to sacrifice everything to ensure your destruction." He pulled a device from his belt, a small box covered in purity seals and blessed by the regimental chaplain for exactly this purpose. A trigger for the demolition charges his stormtroopers had planted throughout the crew compartment while he had distracted the demon with their confrontation. The Rorke demon's smile faded as it understood what was about to happen. "You would die to stop us. You would sacrifice yourself and your men?" "Without hesitation," Kraus replied, "for the Emperor." He triggered the charges. The Emperor's wrath exploded from within, the blast consuming Commissar, stormtroopers, and possessed crew members alike. The force of the detonation was sufficient to breach the ammunition storage, and the tank's entire load of shells cooked off simultaneously, creating a secondary explosion that sent chunks of blessed armor plating and demonic flesh flying across 100 meters in every direction. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained of the once proud Leman Russ but a burning crater and scattered debris. The demons had been banished back to the warp, their mortal hosts destroyed beyond any possibility of recovery. The souls of the original crew members were lost, consumed by the entities that had possessed them, denied whatever afterlife might await the Emperor's faithful. Commissar Kraus and his stormtroopers were dead, their bodies obliterated in the blast, but their sacrifice had prevented the full transformation of the Emperor's wrath into a true demon engine. Had they arrived even minutes later, the corruption would have progressed too far to stop, and the Imperium would have had to deal with a fully manifest demon engine rampaging through its lines. The battle for Quintus 7 continued, but the 217th Armored Regiment would never be the same. They had lost not just a tank and its crew, but the certainty that their faith alone could protect them from the warp's predations. They had learned that corruption could strike anyone, anywhere, that even the most loyal servants could be claimed if circumstances aligned badly enough. And in the depths of the warp, 4 demons raged at their banishment, already planning their return, already searching for new vessels through which to inflict their malice upon the Materium. The fate of the Emperor's Wrath's crew was not unique in the Imperium's long and bloody history. Thousands of similar incidents have occurred across the million worlds of the Emperor's domain, each one a small tragedy in the vast tragedy that is the eternal war against chaos. But each incident teaches the same lessons, reveals the same vulnerabilities, demonstrates the same horrifying truth about the nature of demonic possession. The first lesson is simple. No one is safe. Faith is a powerful defense against the warp, but it is not absolute. The most devout believer, the most loyal soldier, can still be possessed if the circumstances are right and the demon is powerful enough. The crew of the Emperor's Wrath were not weak-willed heretics or hidden traitors. They were good men, faithful servants of the Emperor who had served loyally for years. But when the warp reached out for them, when reality grew thin enough for demons to manifest, their faith was not sufficient to save them. This is a truth that the ecclesiarchy does not like to acknowledge publicly. The official doctrine teaches that faith is absolute protection, that those who truly believe in the Emperor's divine power cannot be claimed by demons. But the Inquisition knows better. The Grey Knights know better. Anyone who has actually fought against demonic incursions knows that faith is necessary but not sufficient. It must be combined with vigilance, with proper ritual protections, with immediate response to any signs of corruption, and even then, sometimes it is not enough. The second lesson concerns the vulnerability created by isolation. The crew of the Emperor's Wrath were sealed inside their tank, cut off from the rest of their army by meters of ceramite and plasteel. When the possession began, there was no immediate help available, no chaplain to perform a hasty exorcism, no psyker to counter the warp energies flowing into the crew compartment, no commissar to execute the corrupted before the taint could spread. They were alone, and that isolation allowed the corruption to consume all 4 crew members before anyone outside even realized what was happening. This is an inherent vulnerability of armored warfare. Tank crews must be sealed inside their vehicles during combat to protect them from enemy fire. But that same protection becomes a prison when demonic possession occurs. The Departamento Munitorum has attempted to address this vulnerability through various means. Additional faith-based protections blessed into the vehicles themselves, requirements for tank commanders to be trained in basic exorcism rituals, protocols for abandoning vehicles at the first sign of corruption. But these measures are imperfect at best, and many tank crews still fall victim to possession every year across the Imperium. The third lesson is about the speed of corruption. From the first signs that something was wrong with Thruss to the complete possession of all 4 crew members took less than 30 minutes. This is typical of sudden onset demonic manifestation. When a demon finds a vulnerable target and the barrier between reality and the warp is thin, the possession can progress with terrifying speed. There is often simply not enough time for proper ritual response, for calling in specialists, for anything beyond immediate and violent action. This is why the commissariat exists. This is why they are granted the authority to execute suspected cultists and possessed without trial or appeal. In cases of demonic corruption, hesitation means death for everyone nearby. Better to err on the side of excessive force and kill a potentially innocent person than to allow a demon to fully manifest and claim dozens or hundreds of additional victims. The fourth lesson, perhaps the most disturbing, is about what happens to the original soul when possession occurs. Contrary to what is taught in many imperial churches, the possessed are not simply puppets with the original person completely gone. The evidence from exorcisms and from interrogations of briefly captured possessed suggests that some fragment of the original consciousness often remains, trapped inside the corrupted flesh, aware of everything the demon does, but powerless to stop it. This means that Thruss was probably aware as his body murdered Vossen, that Holm likely experienced every moment of his physical transformation into something alien and wrong, that Rourke might have been screaming silently as the demon used his knowledge to slaughter his fellow guardsmen, that Vossen felt everything the Slaneshi entity did with his body, was forced to share in its pleasure at causing suffering. The Inquisition keeps this information classified, known only to those with the highest clearances. The general population is taught that possession is instant and complete, that the original person is gone as soon as the demon enters their body. This is a merciful lie. The truth, that possessed victims remain partially aware throughout their ordeal, would be too much for most citizens to bear. It would undermine the already fragile morale of Imperial forces, knowing that if they fall to corruption, they might remain conscious and aware, but unable to control their actions. Historical records maintained by the Ordo Malleus contain numerous documented cases of mass possession events similar to what occurred aboard the Emperor's Wrath. One of the most infamous involves the entire crew of the super heavy tank Divine Fury during the Vrax campaign. The Baneblade class tank's crew of 12 were simultaneously possessed during a particularly intense engagement, and the resulting demon engine rampaged through Imperial lines for nearly 40 minutes before a melter bomb dropped from a Valkyrie finally disabled it. The casualty count exceeded 300 before the corrupted war machine was stopped. Another case from the archives describes an incident during the defense of Calth in the Horus Heresy. Multiple Legiones Astartes vehicles belonging to the Ultramarines were simultaneously possessed when Wordbearer's sorcerers performed a mass ritual designed to weaken the barrier between reality and the warp across the entire battlefield. The resulting chaos saw brother fighting brother, loyal Space Marines forced to destroy their own vehicles to stop the possessed crews from inflicting more damage. The psychological impact of those events still echoes through the Ultramarines chapter 10,000 years later. Geller. Field failures aboard ships traveling through the warp often result in similar scenarios, though on a much larger and more catastrophic scale. When the protective field that keeps warp entities at bay suddenly collapses, demons pour through the breach in reality like a flood. Crew members are possessed in their dozens or hundreds, and entire sections of the ship can transform into nightmare realms where the laws of physics no longer apply. Tank crews aboard ship during such events are particularly vulnerable, sealed inside their vehicles in the cargo holds, often among the last to receive warning that something has gone wrong. The archives contain one particularly chilling account from a surviving crew member who had stepped out of his tank to inspect its treads just moments before a Geller field failure occurred. He watched through a viewport as his 3 brothers, still sealed inside the crew compartment, underwent transformation. He described how their screams through the Vox suddenly changed pitch and tone, becoming something that should not have been possible with human vocal cords. He described how the tank itself seemed to come alive, its weapons training on targets that had not existed moments before. And he described the moment when one of his possessed crewmates looked directly at him through the vision block, and he saw in those corrupted eyes a mixture of malevolent hunger and desperate, pleading terror. That survivor was executed by the commissariat 3 days later when it was discovered he had been exposed to warp energies during the incident. The Imperium takes no chances with potential corruption, even in those who appear to have resisted it. From these historical incidents, certain patterns emerge. Demonic possession of tank crews tends to occur under specific circumstances, during prolonged combat in areas with high warp activity, when psychic phenomena are occurring nearby, when the crew's faith has been shaken by particularly horrific experiences, or when deliberate ritual corruption is being attempted by enemy forces. The Ordo Malleus has developed protocols for identifying high-risk situations and implementing additional protections, but these protocols are not universally followed, and even when they are not always successful. One interesting pattern is that tank crews who maintain strong bonds with each other and who regularly perform the proper machine spirit appeasement rituals seem to be slightly more resistant to possession than crews who neglect these practices. This has led some tech priests to theorize that the machine spirit itself provides a small measure of protection, that a well-maintained and properly blessed vehicle is less likely to become a vector for demonic manifestation. However, this theory remains unproven, and the Adeptus Mechanicus has not officially endorsed it. The Imperium's response to incidents of tank crew possession follows a well-established protocol. First, the corrupted vehicle must be immobilized and destroyed as quickly as possible, using whatever force is necessary. This typically means concentrated fire from other armored vehicles, melter bombs delivered by close assault teams, or in extreme cases, orbital bombardment. There is no attempt at recovery or exorcism in the field. The risk of the corruption spreading is too great. Second, all personnel who had contact with the possessed crew in the hours before the possession manifested must be interrogated by the commissariat, or, if available, the Inquisition. This is because possession sometimes begins with a demon influencing its target subtly, spreading small amounts of corruption through conversation or proximity before actually claiming the victim's body. Anyone exposed to this preliminary influence might themselves be at risk of full possession. Third, the immediate area where the possession occurred must be blessed and purified by the regiment's chaplains. The ground itself can become tainted by prolonged exposure to demonic presence, and if this taint is not addressed, it can create weak points in reality that make future possessions more likely. In severe cases, the entire battlefield must be declared spiritually compromised, and combat operations must be suspended until proper purification rituals can be performed. Fourth, and perhaps most controversially, all written and vox records of the incident must be collected and reviewed by the commissariat. Any accounts that describe the possession in too much detail, that might inspire fear or doubt in those who read them, or that could potentially be used by enemy propagandists, are to be destroyed. The official records will note only that a vehicle was lost to enemy action and that its crew died heroically in service to the Emperor. The truth that they were possessed and turned their weapons against their own forces is classified at the highest levels. This information control serves several purposes. It prevents panic among the ranks, maintains morale by preventing soldiers from dwelling on the possibility of possession, and denies the enemy intelligence about the effectiveness of their corruption attempts. But it also means that many lessons that could be learned from these incidents are never properly disseminated, and the same mistakes are made again and again across the Imperium, because those who might benefit from past experience are never told what actually happened. The psychological impact on surviving members of units that have experienced a possession incident is severe and long-lasting. Tank crews who witnessed a brother vehicle turn against them often develop what the Departamento Munitorum's medical officers classify as corruption anxiety, a persistent fear that they themselves might be next, that they might lose control of their bodies and become instruments of the enemy. This anxiety can interfere with combat performance and has led to several documented cases of preventive suicides, guardsmen killing themselves rather than risk possession. Infantry units that were fired upon by possessed tanks often develop severe trust issues regarding armored support. They become reluctant to operate in close proximity to tanks, fearing that any of them might suddenly turn hostile. This reluctance can seriously compromise combined arms operations and has forced some commanders to keep their armor and infantry separated to a tactically disadvantageous degree. And perhaps worst of all, the families of those who were possessed and subsequently killed often never learn the truth about how their loved ones died. They are told only that Trooper such and such died heroically in service to the Emperor, killed in action against the enemies of mankind. They are not told that their son or daughter or spouse became a demon-ridden monster that had to be destroyed by their own side. This ignorance is a mercy in some ways, but it also means that the true cost of the Imperium's endless war is never fully acknowledged. So what can be done to prevent incidents like the one that claimed the Emperor's wrath? The answer, unfortunately, is not much. Demonic possession is a fundamental hazard of existence in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, as unavoidable as the need to breathe or the pull of gravity. As long as humans fight wars near areas of high warp activity, as long as they must seal themselves inside vehicles that can become isolated from support, as long as the Chaos Gods exist and hunger for mortal souls, possession will occur. However, certain measures can reduce the risk. The most obvious is faith. Tank crews who maintain their devotions, who pray regularly to the God Emperor, who wear their faith like armor, are demonstrably more resistant to corruption than those who neglect their spiritual duties. The regimental chaplains play a crucial role in this, visiting tank crews regularly, conducting services, ensuring that the men understand the importance of faith not just as a moral imperative, but as a practical defense against very real threats. Physical protections also help, though their effectiveness is debated. Purity seals applied to a tank's hull, wards inscribed on the interior of the crew compartment, blessed icons hung from the targeting optics. All of these are standard practice in most Imperial Guard regiments. Do they actually provide protection, or are they merely psychological comfort? The tech priests insist they serve a real function, that the blessings and rituals strengthen the tank's machine spirit and create a measure of resistance to warp taint. The commissariat is more skeptical, viewing them as useful morale aids, but nothing more. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Training can also make a difference. Crews trained to recognize the early warning signs of possession, who know to immediately report any unusual behavior from their fellows, who understand the protocols for emergency abandonment of a compromised vehicle, are more likely to prevent a possession from reaching the catastrophic stage. Unfortunately, such training is rare outside of elite units or regiments that have previously experienced possession incidents. Most tank crews receive only the most basic instruction on spiritual threats, focused more on maintaining faith than on recognizing and responding to actual demonic manifestation. The presence of psychic defenses can be helpful, but is rarely available to standard Imperial Guard units. The Grey Knights, the Imperium's premier demon hunters, occasionally attach specialist teams to conventional forces operating in high-risk areas, and these teams can provide warning of demonic activity and sometimes intervene before possession occurs. But the Grey Knights are few and their duties many, and the vast majority of Imperial Guard regiments will never benefit from their protection. Some radical members of the Inquisition have suggested more extreme measures. Implanting all tank crew members with explosive devices that can be remotely triggered if possession is suspected. Mandatory psychic screening of all armored personnel, with those showing any signs of sensitivity to the warp being reassigned to less critical duties. Regular chemical treatments designed to suppress the brain functions that make possession easier. These proposals have been rejected as too extreme, too costly, or too likely to cause more problems than they solve. But they continue to be debated in certain circles, and it is possible that some are quietly being tested without official sanction. The most effective prevention, unfortunately, is also the most draconian. Simply execute anyone who shows any signs that might potentially indicate the beginning of possession, without waiting for confirmation. This is the approach favored by the most zealous commissars, and while it undoubtedly prevents some possession incidents, it also results in the deaths of many innocent soldiers whose only crime was experiencing stress, fatigue, or minor psychological issues. Most commanders find this approach unacceptable, at least until a crisis situation forces them to reconsider. The final aspect we must address is what happens to the souls of those who are possessed. Imperial doctrine teaches that the faithful who serve the Emperor will be rewarded in death, that their souls will find peace in his divine presence. But what of those who are possessed against their will? Are they condemned for the actions the demon performed using their bodies? Does the Emperor recognize that they were victims rather than willing collaborators? The ecclesiarchy offers no clear answer to these questions. Some preachers teach that possession itself is evidence of spiritual weakness, that a truly faithful servant could never be claimed regardless of circumstances. Others argue that possession is a test, and those who resist it spiritually, even if they cannot physically prevent it, will still be judged worthy. Still others take a more compassionate view, insisting that the Emperor judges each soul individually and will recognize the difference between willing corruption and forced possession. The Inquisition's position, when it bothers to address the question at all, is more pragmatic. Whether the possessed were guilty or innocent in a spiritual sense is irrelevant, they argue. What matters is that they were destroyed before they could spread further corruption. Their fate in death is between them and the Emperor. The Inquisition's concern is only with preventing their possessed bodies from harming others. Those who have survived exorcism, rare as such cases are, report terrible visions of what they experienced while possessed. They describe their consciousness being trapped in a tiny corner of their own mind, able to observe but not control anything, forced to watch as the demon used their body for acts of violence and blasphemy. They describe the demon rifling through their memories, using everything they knew against their own side. They describe the physical sensations of their body transforming, of flesh reshaping itself in ways that should not be possible, of pain that went beyond anything they had imagined. And they describe, worst of all, the temptation. Because the demon does not simply dominate its victim. It tries to convince them. It whispers promises of power, of pleasure, of answers to questions they have always wondered about. It offers to make the pain stop if they will just surrender, just accept its presence, just agree to willing cooperation. And in the depths of agony and horror and isolation, with no help coming and no hope of rescue, some possessed find themselves considering those offers, even knowing that acceptance means eternal damnation. This is why the Inquisition shows no mercy to the possessed, even to those who claim they resisted the demon's influence. The fact that they were strong enough to maintain some fragment of themselves during possession does not mean they were strong enough to resist the demon's temptations entirely. There is always the possibility that they accepted some bargain, made some compromise, allowed some small piece of corruption to take root in exchange for lesser torment. And even the smallest fragment of willing corruption is enough to damn a soul and make that person a potential vector for future demonic manifestation. Better, the Inquisition teaches, to destroy all who have been touched by possession and let the Emperor sort out the guilty from the innocent in whatever afterlife awaits them. It is a harsh doctrine, and one that has led to the deaths of many who might have been saved with proper exorcism. But in a universe as dark and dangerous as Warhammer 40,000, mercy is a luxury that the Imperium often cannot afford. The story of the Emperor's wrath and its crew is, ultimately, a story about the price of war, in a universe where the enemies you fight are not just flesh and blood but metaphysical horrors that can corrupt you from within. It is a story about the vulnerability of even the most loyal servants when isolated from support and exposed to the warp's malevolent attention. It is a story about sacrifice, about Commissar Kraus choosing to die rather than let the corruption spread further. And it is a story about the fundamental hopelessness of the Imperium's situation, where even complete devotion and faithful service cannot guarantee protection from the darkness. For the millions of tank crew members serving in the Imperial Guard across the galaxy, this story is a nightmare made real. Every time they seal the hatches before combat, every time they hear strange noises over the Vox, every time a crewmate says something slightly odd, they must wonder, is this it? Is this the moment when the warp reaches out for us? Will we be the next to fall, to transform, to become the very thing we have sworn to destroy? They carry on anyway, because that is what Imperial Guardsmen do. They face impossible odds against enemies that can kill them in 1,000 different horrible ways. They fight knowing that their faith might not be enough, that their prayers might go unanswered, that they might die screaming and afraid and far from home. They fight because someone must stand against the darkness, because if they do not, then who will? The Emperor protects, the saying goes, but sometimes the Emperor's protection is not a shield against harm. Sometimes it is simply the strength to face harm with courage, to die with faith intact, even when faith could not prevent death, to choose duty over survival when those choices conflict. Commander Sebastian Rourke and his crew chose duty. They served faithfully for years, maintained their tank with proper ritual respect, conducted themselves with honor and courage. When corruption claimed them despite these things, when demons wore their bodies like stolen clothing and turned their weapons against their brothers, They remain trapped inside, conscious and aware, unable to prevent the horror, but never surrendering their essential selves to it. That counts for something. In the vast, uncaring machinery of the Imperium, individual lives matter very little. But perhaps, somewhere in the immaterium, in whatever corner of existence the God Emperor's attention might occasionally fall upon, the souls of those 4 men found the peace that was denied them in life. We can hope so, anyway. Hope is about all that remains when the darkness closes in. In the final accounting, incidents like the possession of the Emperor's wrath serve a purpose within the Imperium, even if it is a dark one. They remind the faithful that vigilance is not optional, that faith must be constantly reinforced, that the moment you lower your guard is the moment the warp finds its way in. They justify the extreme measures taken by the Commissariat and the Inquisition, demonstrating why mercy must sometimes be sacrificed on the altar of survival. They steel the resolve of those who continue to fight, who see what happens when good men fall to corruption and redouble their determination not to follow that path. The Imperium is built on suffering. It is powered by the sacrifice of billions of souls, ground up in the eternal war against enemies, both without and within. Every story of possession, every tale of faithful servants falling to corruption, every account of brave soldiers dying to stop the spread of demonic taint, adds another brick to the foundation of fear and determination that keeps the Imperium fighting despite the hopelessness of its situation. Is this sustainable? Can humanity continue indefinitely in this state of perpetual crisis, always one step from annihilation, depending on the faith and sacrifice of soldiers who know their chances of survival are minimal? The answer, from the perspective of the 41st millennium, appears to be yes, though only because there is no alternative. The Imperium endures because it must endure. The cost is measured in lives, in souls, in the sanity of those who witness these horrors and must continue fighting anyway. For the tank crews of the Imperial Guard, the lesson is clear. Maintain your faith, perform your rituals, trust in your brothers, do your duty. Hope that will be enough. Pray that the Emperor's protection will extend to you, but know that it might not, and be prepared to face the consequences with courage when that day comes. And if you find yourself sealed inside a metal tomb, watching your brothers transform into something that should not exist, feeling the corruption creeping into your own mind, remember this: the Emperor may not protect your body, but your soul remains your own until the very end. Hold on to that truth. Hold on to your faith. Hold on to your humanity for as long as you possibly can. Because in the end, that is all any of us can do in the grim darkness of the far future. We hold the line. We maintain our faith. We do our duty. And when death comes, whether clean or corrupt, whether quick or agonizing, we face it knowing that we served to the best of our ability in the most desperate war ever fought. The Emperor protects, and when he cannot protect, he gives us the strength to endure. That will have to be enough. If you've made it this far into this deep dive into one of the most horrifying fates imaginable in the Warhammer 40K universe, thank you for watching. The possessed tank crew represents everything terrible about the grimdark setting. Good people, faithful servants, can still fall to corruption through no fault of their own, trapped in their own bodies as demons use them to kill their brothers. It's a nightmare scenario that highlights just how dangerous the 40K universe truly is. If you enjoyed this exploration of Warhammer 40K's darker corners, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are countless more stories of horror, heroism, and tragedy waiting to be told in the grim darkness of the far future. And I'll be bringing them to you in this same atmospheric, detailed style that lets you really sink into the terrible beauty of this universe. What faction or topic should I cover next? Let me know in the comments. And remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But there are also stories worth telling, heroes worth remembering, and horrors worth understanding. For the Emperor. Always for the Emperor.